Welcome back to the shop, everyone. This week's video takes place in week 5 of 2023, which is January 30th to February 5th. So to start off this video, we are going to carry on where we left off, which is with some of the coil wiring. Looks like I'm just coiling up some of the extra wires for the coils, and then I'm going to work on pulling the coils off of the car. There is a specific reason why I took them off that will become clear in a little bit here, but before we get into the meat of this video, let's clean up because the shop's a bit of a mess right now. Alright, so now that we've cleaned up a little bit, we can start replacing these TMZ front end down tubes. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start by measuring the angle of the down tube, both from the top, how angled down is it from the frame rail towards the front, and how much is it kicked out towards the outside of the car as well. I want to try and mimic these as much as possible. I know that when I had the front end on there, these were, good starting points for the angles. But yeah, so I'm just gonna measure them. And I'm just writing down the measurements on a sheet of paper. I did write them on the car, but it's also good just to have them elsewhere as reference in case, I cut them off or grind them or something like that. It's in two places. Since I am going to be grinding on the car, get some of the front ends, like I just pulled the wiring harness out of there. And what I'm doing right now is when I cut that front tube off, there's going to be nothing, supporting the frame rail that's coming straight out of the car, so it could potentially move up and down and left and right. So I'm just thinking, how am I going to brace this temporarily so that when I cut that upper tube it doesn't move and go out of whack. So I have that chunk of tube there, and what I can do is I'm just taking a rough measurement, and I can cut that tube down, cut it with a couple of angles, kind of form it a little bit for the bottom tube and then attach it to the strut tower. Since this is just a temporary brace and it doesn't need to be super precise, I'm just using my cutoff wheel in order to make the cuts. If I needed this to be a little bit more precise, I would probably crank out my chop saw, just because then I could get an actual accurate cut. As you can see, with this just being loosely clamped on the bench, it moves a lot, and you know, these angles aren't great. It's not even on the same side, but it's cut. It's called good enough. I know it's kind of hard to see with the bar in the way, but what I did there is I just put the temporary brace up and marked out roughly where it's going to be installed, and I did that so I could so I knew where to grind down on the shock tower and on the tube, so that way when I tack that temporary brace in, it's got a solid tack and good clean metal to weld to. Since I'm not the best welder, I got to do everything I can to try and get the best welds possible, which means just cleaning up the area with a little bit of acetone. And before I start welding, I got to do one of the most boring jobs, which is grind tungsten. It's a boring job, but if I was a better welder, I wouldn't dip the tungsten so much and I wouldn't have to grind so much. It's a double-edged sword. Now that we have some usable tungsten, we can start tacking in that temporary brace. It really doesn't take much, just a couple of solid tacks, and that will allow me to do everything I need to do to remove the front end. So now that I got a couple of tacks on there, I'm really going to be cutting on this front end. So I'm going to throw some of the flame retardant paper around all of the new shiny stuff, both you know, in the brakes and the intake and stuff. And also that'll help kind of keep grinding dust off of the and out of the engine. I really should have done this before I even ground the tube and the shock tower to get clean metal. But better late than never. I am about to cut and throw sparks at literally everything. So yeah, get to protect your stuff if you can. With everything protected, it's time to just start cutting off this front brace. So I'm starting at the top there. I'm getting as close to the frame as close to the frame rail or whatever you want to call it, without actually cutting into the metal plate behind. And same thing on the front. I'm doing my best to get to grind as close to the tube as I can. I don't really want to gouge the tube and you know, then have to go back and repair it. I did end up cutting into it both on the top there and on the bottom, so I will have to repair it a little bit later. I should have quit while I was ahead. I should have just, you know, got the grinder out and ground all of this down. But the cutting wheel is definitely faster, so I was just trying to be lazy. Yeah, I should have just used this flap disc and just ground it down from the get-go. Live and learn. I mean, at the end of the day, it is just metal, so you can weld more back in. It's really not a big deal. So first look, with everything ground down, when I got these tubes, I got them intentionally long, and I had them bent intentionally long, knowing full well I was going to cut them down. You know, at one point in time I consider, okay, we'll get a little bit shorter, but the reality is, you know, for an extra foot of pipe, you know, costs what, maybe $5. I'd rather buy an extra foot of pipe and then cut it down shorter myself, instead of buying it that, you know, what I think is just the exact right length, and then it turns up being too short and the whole piece is scrap. I also don't have a pipe bender, so I had to go out to somebody else to get the pipe bent. So that's another reason why I went longer, and then I'll work my way back. So what I'm doing here is I'm doing my best to figure out the angle that I need to cut this tube. The end of it's cut at 90 degrees right now. So as you saw, the down tubes have, you know, I think it's like 7 degrees of angle. So what I'm doing is I'm trying to figure out what angle to cut that pipe at. I think I do cut it at like 7 degrees because it's 7 degrees down. Before I cut that down, what I want to do is I want to reinstall the procharger on the car, because that's why that's the reason why I'm replacing these tubes, is to ensure that the procharger is going to be able to be installed and uninstalled with these new front tubes installed on the car. So in order to make sure it all fits, I need to put it back on the car. You know, building cars and like what they show on TV. I struggle getting the damn pulley on. I dropped the keyway like 2 or 3 times, I think. I eventually got it on, but man, it was a bigger pain in the ass than it should have been. That's for damn sure. Alright, so what I'm looking at here is right now the housing on the procharger is clocked, and it's clocked to the inside of the car, and I don't remember, I think it's hitting on the power steering pump or it's hitting on something. So what I got to do is pull this back off, undo the bolts on the housing, and then I can just clock the outlet to, you know, whatever I want. So I'm going to clock the outlet into the fender well, and then I can have the what's the word? The piping coming off of the outlet go to the intercooler through the fender, and then do the same thing on the other side. It can exit the intercooler into the fender and then come up and into the side mount intake. So in order to change the clocking on this, it's I think 6 bolts. There's 2 bolts holding down 3 different hold down tabs. You just undo them and then you can spin it. So after rotating the output of the procharger, you can see that it is now pointing into the wheel well, which is much better than pointing directly at the power steering pump, because that was never going to work. It was pretty much touching the power steering pump. I never would have been able to get any of the tubes on there, so this is a much better outcome for what we need. And with that outputted the right way, we can now continue installing the driver's side bar and make sure that it's, you know, at a good length. Since I'm going to do some more cutting and grinding, I just want to make sure that everything is protected, and, you know, that way I'm not throwing sparks and dust and stuff into all the components and not shooting sparks at it, which could mark it and mar it and make it look ugly. You know, you spend a fair amount of money on this stuff, do your best to protect it. Getting the tube set up in the chop stuff for the first cut. As I said, I believe I'm cutting this at like a 7-degree angle thereabouts, because that's how much the angle was down. And what I'm trying to do is, the reason why the tube is kind of sticking up as far as it is because I want it to have that, you know, lean to it when it gets installed. So if I had the pipe flat and I cut that 90 degrees, it wouldn't have this angle like it does. It would have to be installed straight up and down, which I don't want. So you can see I just threw my angle meter on it because I want to, you know, get the appropriate angle. You can see my breath a little bit. It's a little chilly out that day. Yeah, luckily I've still got the passenger side bar on, so I can use it as a little bit of a reference and see if the angle's, you know, right, wrong, if I need more or less. So as I was making an adjustment to the angle, I actually wrote down the angle on the cardboard just so when I go to do the other side, I can use the exact same angle. I don't need to mess around with it. And the nice thing about having my procharger installed for this entire process is I kind of know that I'm not hitting it, I'm not interfering with it. So what I'm doing right now should be good for the long run. So just doing a quick little tack just to hold this in place. Checking to see if I've got the angle about right, because I can always throw it in the cutter and, you know, change the angle a little bit if I need to. And I'm just marking on the bar roughly where I need this notched. So yeah, I'm trying to make sure that I get this cut at the right angle and in the right place, and you know, if I cut this at the wrong angle, then it's not going to install the way I want it to. And you know, while I do have a little bit of excess to work with, I don't have that much excess. And so right now what I'm doing is just getting the chop saw set up a little bit more comfortably. It's a little bit nicer to work on it on the bench. It's a little bit of more comfortable level. So just getting the angle set up roughly with the line that I had marked on the tube. very drastically changed the angle, and we're going to try another cut. And I feel like that's a bit better. But yeah, it's definitely not short enough. And what I'm doing is I'm just marking the center line on the pipe, so that way when I put it in the cutter, I know where I want it. And we're skipping around a little bit, but we are moving to me setting up my new tube notcher. I went out and I bought this. It was on sale. I really don't like notching tubes by hand, like with a grinder and cutoff wheel, just because I'm not good at it. And this tubing notcher was priced real well, and so I bought it, and I'm just learning how to use it right now. Man, I am so happy I bought this tool. I've used it a few times since this video, and it is just so nice to have. I'm so happy that I have it, because it's just, yeah, it's such a super nice tool to have. Alright, so we're just getting this thing put together. I'm kind of figuring it out as I go. And what do you do when you can't figure it out on your own? You read the instructions. Yeah, I mean, getting the whole thing sorted out is it's taking a little bit of time, but as with any new tool, you just got to read the instructions, figure it out, and see how it works. With it more or less figured out and all set up, time to grab a fresh battery on the drill, grab the face shield, throw a little cutting oil on the bit, and let's make our first notch. I mean, that was so quick. That was super nice. I'm just so happy with how that turned out. The only thing is the notch was not where I needed it. It was, yeah, it was wrong. So you can kind of see that the tube is definitely at a different position for this cut. So as it turns out, even that second tube notch was not great and wasn't the right angle. So here we are going for, I think, round 3. Oh man, I fucked up. I meant to loosen the clamp that holds the pipe on, but I undid the vise and the whole thing dropped down. Surprisingly enough, I've done that more than once. I usually catch myself now as I'm in the process of doing it, and only it doesn't fall all the way out, but God, yeah, it's kind of hilarious. But on round 3, you can see the pipe is actually pretty much 90 degrees. Like, it's pretty much perfectly flat here. And I'm tubing like pretty much perfectly flat. And I realized, yeah, that actually kind of makes sense. Because the pipe, sure, it angles out, but it's still flat to the pipe, or 90 degrees to the pipe. So there we go. Fits deadly. I'm really happy with that. Well, we needed to adjust a little bit more because, well, still hadn't quite figured it out. Either that or the angle was just off. It was too high up still. Yeah, now that I got this notched, I got the angles right, I'm just going to tack this in. Just a quick little tack on the top, quick little tack on the bottom. Yeah, just check and make sure I got the angles the way I wanted them. Got everything placed right. Apparently I forgot to edit me standing around here out, so well, you get a few seconds of me just standing around, I suppose. I should really fire the guy who's editing these videos because he's trash. So we're just doing a little bit of comparison from the old one to the new one. And so we are just going to do a little tiny bit of cleanup. But from this angle, you can kind of see, actually I'm not doing any cleanup, I'm doing a little test fitting. But from this angle, you can see how much space there is in front of the procharger pulley in the front end now. It's done exactly what I needed it to do. It clears, it's going to be super nice. So what I'm doing here is I'm just roughly fitting in the front end just to see if there's any, or to see how much space I have between the front end and that front bar, because it makes a big difference, right? I've got 4 headlight buckets that need to clear and, you know, a bunch of other stuff. So at this point, that front tube is still way too far. You can kind of see that, you know, the front end is not even touching the fender because it's hitting so much. So that means I need to pull this bar way back. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to cut those tacks off, and then because I already know the degree that I need to cut the top end there, and I have a center line drawn on it already, I can just go ahead and I can put that back in the chop saw and chop down, I forget what it is. I mean, I think I take off another 2 inches here, maybe 3 inches, something like that. So by this point, I've cut this enough times and I've kind of worked with this enough that I'm pretty confident in cutting this down to its final length now. So for welding this on, I'm just tacking it on again. It doesn't take a lot to hold this in place, like just a small tack is fairly strong. And with that on, we are going to retest fit the fender, retest fit the nose cone, and we'll see if this is where I want it now. So I think it's fairly obvious the fact that I am taking some measurements and, you know, looking at the angles, and the fact that the front end really did not go on quite as nicely as I would have liked it, that this needs to be cut back some more. So as it turns out, I wasn't confident enough to go back, or to go to the final length. The last cut, you know, I'm just taking it back a little bit, as cutting it back as little as I need to. I don't want to go too much because then I run into the same problem where the procharger pulley will not clear. So it's doing a little bit of cleanup on the surfaces that I've already welded, because they'll have little bumps and that doesn't make for a nice mating surface between the tube and the car. Now that we are back to where we want to be, we can tack this up and we can check clearance on the front end, we can check clearance on the procharger, we can do everything to make sure that this is where we want it to be and how we want it to be. So this is actually looking pretty good, and the reason why there's still a gap at the top is one of the bolts for holding the nose cone to the fender broke, and it's kind of stuck between the plastic. So that's why there's this little gap at the top still. I'll have to fix that later on. But for what we're doing, this actually looks pretty good. The fit's pretty nice. I'm quite happy with it. Now we're going to get into a little bit of cleanup. Since we're happy with this, what I'm going to do is I just knock the bar off and I'm going to clean it all up and get it prepped for welding. And I'm also going to open up the notch in the bottom just a little bit. The reason being is the bottom bar is 1 5/8 of an inch, and I don't have a 1 5/8 inch hole saw. I only have 1.5. So the notch was a little tiny bit small, but we can just easily, open it up and make it fit just a little tiny bit better. Now the bars where we want it, I'm going to grind off all the tack marks from the top of the, where the bar mounts, the bottom, and then I'm going to fill where I nicked the bar with weld. Now that we've got them all filled up, take the grinder to them, grind them smooth. And with that, we can do the final tacks for this bar. So now to test, what we need is, can I get this procharger pulley on and off? This is the moment of truth, and yes we can. I can now easily slide that pulley on and off. I believe that's the largest pulley available, so any smaller pulley should go on there no problem. So with that, I can now go ahead, tighten the pulley on, and I can pull the procharger back off because I don't need it on the car right now, because everything is lining up just how we need it to line up. With the procharger removed, I can undo the tacks on the temporary brace, and then I can take some pictures for Instagram. So I'm kind of getting that side profile of the passenger bar versus the driver's bar, and then taking a picture of the old versus the new. And now that we're done on the driver's side, we can start working on the passenger side. So I just want to add a little bit more paper over top of some of the things on the passenger side. You know, the strut tower, the brakes, the intake, all that good stuff. And so I'm pretty much just going to repeat the entire process on the passenger side now. So install the temporary brace, cut the bar out, get the bar cut at the correct angle, notch out the tube, tack it in. Now that we have both bars tacked in, we can put both fenders on, put the nose cone on, and make sure everything fits before I weld it all together. If I, welded the entire thing solid and then I tried fitting up the front end and found it didn't work, that would just suck. I would essentially have to get new metal, recut it all, and that would just not be fun. Yeah, at this point I am super happy with how everything has turned out. Everything is fitting up nicely. I can install and uninstall the procharger with the tubes on. It's, the bars are symmetrical, so it's the same on both sides. Yeah, all there's left to do is doing some cleanup. So with this little bit of cleanup, that pretty much brings us to the conclusion of this week's video. As always, if you stuck around this long, I'd like to thank you for viewing, and we'll see you in the next one.